Can you tell me what you miss most?
Well, first thing I want to do is see my mom.
There's a scene in MASH that most people remember as adorable. Radar O'Reilly is sitting at his desk outside the commanding officer's tent. Teddy bear on the shelf behind him, grape nahi within reach, doing about 14 things simultaneously, with the particular focused calm of someone who has made administrative chaos look effortless for so long that nobody around him remembers it was ever anything else. Someone walks past and ruffles his hair affectionately. Radar barely looks up. He just absorbs the gesture and keeps working. And the audience smiles, because it's sweet, because Radar is sweet, because that's the role the show built for him and the role he played with such complete commitment that it became for most viewers indistinguishable from who he actually was. But I've been sitting with that scene recently, not the sweetness of it. The other thing. The thing underneath the teddy bear and the grape nehai and the hair ruffling. The thing that only becomes visible when you stop looking at Radar the way the show taught you to look at him and start looking at him the way you'd look at a real person. What you see when you do that is not adorable. What you see is a young man who has been so thoroughly cast in the role of the camp's innocent that nobody, not the characters around him, not the writers, not the audience, ever stopped to ask what it was costing him to stay in that role. What he had to suppress daily in order to remain the person everyone needed him to be. What was accumulating in the quiet spaces between the scenes the camera bothered to follow.
You wanted me to take this, sir? Yeah.
That's the tragic reality of Radar O'Reilly. And once you see it, it changes the entire show. You have to start in Ottumwa, Iowa, not as a punchline. The show sometimes used it as one, which has its own uncomfortable irony, but as a real place that made a real person. Radar grew up on a farm. His father died when he was very young. His mother raised him alone, and he loved her with the uncomplicated totality that children give to the parent who is their entire world. She was everything. The farm was everything. The small, specific, deeply rooted life of Ottumwa was everything. And then the army took him away from it. Just like that. Without asking, without caring that he had a mother who needed him, and a farm that needed him, and a life that was small by most measures, but was entirely, completely his. The army looked at Walter Eugene O'Reilly and saw a body it could use, and it took him, and it sent him to Korea, and it didn't give him any choice in the matter. And here's what I keep coming back to when I think about Radar's situation at the very beginning. He was one of the youngest people in that unit. Not just in years, in emotional preparation, in the specific kind of toughness that comes from extended exposure to the world's capacity for cruelty. Radar didn't have that toughness yet. He arrived in Korea almost absurdly intact, earnest, genuine, carrying a teddy bear and a shortwave radio and an almost supernatural ability to perceive things before they happened, and almost no armor at all against the things that were coming. And Korea was about to test every single one of those qualities in ways Ottumwa could never have prepared him for. Now here's the thing that people almost never talk about when they talk about Radar. He was extraordinary at his job, not in the charming, bumbling, accidentally competent way the show sometimes framed it. Actually, genuinely, quietly extraordinary. He ran the entire administrative operation of a forward surgical unit in an active war zone.
Captains Pierce and McIntyre to see you, sir.
Show them in.
He managed supply chains that should have been unmanageable. He navigated military bureaucracy with a fluency that would have impressed people twice his age, with twice his experience. He kept a camp full of difficult, exhausted, frequently traumatized people functioning at a level that the circumstances had no right to allow. And the whole time, everyone called him the Kid. That's the first layer of the tragedy. Not that Radar was underestimated by people who disliked him. Frank Burns underestimated everyone, and nobody's opinion of Frank Burns carried much weight. It's that Radar was underestimated by the people who genuinely loved him. Hawkeye, who was brilliant and perceptive about almost everything, consistently related to Radar with a warm, affectionate condescension that was completely well-intentioned and completely blind to the actual person it was directed at. Henry Blake called him son in a way that was loving and real, but that also inescapably kept Radar in a child's position relative to everyone around him. He was useful to everyone. He was taken seriously by almost no one. And the worst part is that he cooperated with it. He played the innocent. He maintained the role. He gave the camp what the camp needed from him, which was a combination of extraordinary competence and absolute non-threatening harmlessness. And he did it so consistently and so completely that the role eventually became the box everyone kept him in, even when the person inside the box had long since outgrown it. Before we go further, I want to stop here because this is the part of the video where I think something connects. Think about someone in your life who was always the capable one in the background, the one who made everything work without anyone noticing, the one people treated as younger or simpler than they actually were. not out of malice, just out of the convenient habit of a dynamic that had been established early and never revisited? Drop it in the comments, because I think more people recognize this particular kind of invisible competence than the show ever intended to surface. The person who carries the operational weight while everyone else gets the emotional credit. The one whose contributions were so seamless that they became invisible. I want to know if you've been that person or if you've had one in your life and only realized it later. Let's talk about the teddy bear, because the teddy bear is the most misread object in the entire series, and I don't think that's an accident.
Make sure nobody steals it down there, huh?
Everyone remembers the teddy bear as evidence of Radar's childlike quality, his innocence, the sweet anachronism of a grown man in a war zone clinging to a childhood comfort object. And the show frames it exactly that way. As endearing, as part of what makes Radar Radar, as another piece of the innocent kid from Iowa portrait that defined him for 11 seasons. But sit with the teddy bear differently for a second. That bear traveled from Ottawa to Korea. It was the one physical object Radar had that predated the army, that predated Korea, that belonged entirely to the life he had before any of this. In a camp where everything was army-issued and war-defined and temporary by nature, that bear was the single material proof that Walter O'Reilly had existed before he became Corporal O'Reilly, that there had been a childhood, a farm, a mother, a life that was his rather than the army's. He wasn't clinging to immaturity, he was clinging to the evidence that he had been a person before the war made him a function, and everyone laughed at it. Affectionately, always affectionately, but laughed. And Radar let them laugh because letting them laugh was easier than explaining what it actually was. And explaining would have required a kind of emotional directness that the role of the camp innocent didn't leave room for. So the bear sat on the shelf, and the real reason for it sat somewhere smaller and quieter, where Radar kept everything that was actually his. If finding the hidden emotional truth inside characters like this is what you're here for, subscribe before we go any further. Every week we do exactly this. Dig past the surface of the characters everyone thought they understood and find what was actually living underneath. There's a lot more coming, and I don't want you to miss it. Let's talk about Radar's perceptiveness, because it's the quality the show made most central to his character, and it's also the quality that isolated him most completely. Radar heard things before other people heard them, sensed things before other people sensed them, had an almost preternatural ability to read a room, to understand what was happening beneath the surface of a situation, to know what people needed before they knew they needed it. The show presented this as a quirky superpower, the helicopter sensing thing, the ability to complete people's sentences, the instinct for trouble that was always a few seconds ahead of everyone else.
Trappings of your office side.
But think about what it actually means to live that way. To always be operating on information that nobody else has yet. To perceive undercurrents in conversations that the other participants aren't aware of. To understand in real time the emotional subtext of every interaction you're part of. What people actually mean beneath what they're saying. What they're feeling beneath what they're showing. What's really happening in a room versus what the room thinks is happening. That's not a comfortable way to exist. That's exhausting. That's the specific exhaustion of someone who can never fully switch off, who is always receiving more signal than the people around them are transmitting, who processes the world at a depth and a speed that makes genuine peer-level connection genuinely difficult to find. Think about what it's like to walk into the mess tent for breakfast and already know, before a single word has been spoken, that Hawkeye is in a darker mood than yesterday's jokes are letting on, that Henry is anxious about something he hasn't told anyone yet, that the tension between two nurses is about to become a problem that somebody is going to have to quietly manage. And then you sit down and eat your powdered eggs and you say nothing about any of it, because saying something would require explaining how you know, and explaining how you know would surface a version of yourself that the room isn't prepared for, and frankly doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with. So you file it. You add it to the running inventory of everything you're tracking, everything you're monitoring, everything you're quietly managing, so that the people around you can have the luxury of only knowing what's directly in front of them. And nobody thanks you for it. Not because they're ungrateful, they genuinely don't know it's happening. They can't see the labor because the labor is invisible by design, because the moment it became visible, it would stop working, because the whole architecture of what Radar did for that camp depended on it looking effortless and natural, and simply like who he was rather than what he was constantly, tirelessly, without interruption doing. That's the cruelest part of that kind of invisible competence. The better you are at it, the more completely it disappears. And the more completely it disappears, the more alone you are inside it. Radar was extraordinary at something nobody could see, and the invisibility wasn't a side effect, it was the price of admission. Who in that camp was operating on Radar's frequency? Not Hawkeye, who was brilliant but whose perception was channeled almost entirely into wit and performance. Not Henry, who was warm but whose awareness of the people around him was selective at best. Not Trapper, not Frank, not Hot Lips, maybe Sidney Friedman occasionally. In the way that a trained psychiatrist occasionally matched the emotional depth that Radar was operating at naturally, without training, just by being who he was. But Sidney wasn't there every day, and Radar was perceptive every day, which meant he was, in a very specific sense, alone every day. Seeing more than anyone else saw, understanding more than anyone else understood, and having almost nobody to share any of it with, because sharing it would have required someone who could meet him where he actually was. And that person was rarely, if ever, in the 4077th. I want to talk about the loneliness that the show dressed up as social warmth.
I guess outside of our families, we'll never be closer to anybody than we are to each other.
Because this is the most subtle and most devastating element of Radar's story, and it almost never gets acknowledged. Radar was one of the most socially connected people in the camp. Everybody liked him. Everybody was genuinely fond of him. He was woven into the daily life of the 4077th in a way that made him seem, on the surface, one of the most embedded members of the community. You'd look at Radar moving through that camp, known by everyone, needed by everyone, greeted with warmth everywhere he went, and you'd think, this person is not lonely. But there's a specific kind of loneliness that only exists in the middle of warmth. The loneliness of being well-liked without being well-known. Of being everyone's little brother without being anyone's true peer. Of having 100 people who were glad to see you and almost nobody who actually saw you. That was Radar's loneliness. He was the camp's mascot in a way that the camp meant entirely lovingly. And that was, for Radar, the most isolating possible form of belonging. Because mascots don't get to be complicated. Mascots don't get to be struggling or ambivalent or privately devastated, or any of the things that Radar was, privately, across multiple seasons of the show. Mascots exist to make other people feel something. Warmth, affection, lightness, and Radar was extraordinarily good at that. Function, which meant the function was all most people saw. The person performing the function was almost entirely invisible. Now let's talk about the romantic loneliness. Because this is the layer the show visits occasionally and then steps away from before it gets truly uncomfortable. Radar's attempts at romance across the series follow a pattern so consistent it stops feeling like bad luck and starts feeling like something structural. He meets someone. He is earnest and warm and completely genuine in a way that should be enormously appealing. And then the connection doesn't hold. She gets transferred, the timing is wrong, something intervenes, and Radar is left, in the same place he started. And the show treats each of these moments as gentle comedy. A little sad, but sweet. Radar tries, Radar fails, Radar bounces back. But look at what's actually accumulating. Every unsuccessful connection was delivering a message. Not intentionally, not cruelly, but the message was landing anyway, with the quiet consistency of water wearing down stone. The message was this: you are the person people are glad to have around. You are not the person someone looks at and chooses. You are the camp's little brother, the helpful one, the sweet one, the one whose presence makes the day easier for everyone else. And the specific cruelty of that message, the reason it cuts deeper than simple rejection, is that it's delivered wrapped in warmth. Nobody was mean to Radar. Nobody turned him away coldly or told him directly that he wasn't what they were looking for. The rejection always came cushioned in affection, softened by genuine fondness, dressed up as circumstance rather than choice, which meant he could never quite locate the wound. He couldn't point to a moment and say, there, that's where it happened, that's the thing that hurt. It was everywhere and nowhere, distributed across 100 small interactions that each seemed fine individually and were only devastating in their accumulation. And accumulation for Radar was the real danger, because he never discharged any of it. He just kept absorbing, kept filing, kept adding each new message to the existing stack, without ever finding a person or a place or a moment that felt safe enough to finally put it all down. You are not the one someone decides to stay for. And Radar filed that message in the same place he filed everything that hurt. Somewhere small, somewhere that didn't interfere with the morning's work, or the afternoon's logistics, or the evening's radio check. Somewhere quiet, where it sat and waited, and occasionally, in the dark between one day and the next, made itself known. He carried it, the way he carried everything, without complaint, without anyone noticing. Let me talk about his mother. because Radar's mother is one of the most present absent characters in the entire series, and the relationship between them contains something important that the show never quite examined directly. Radar wrote to his mother constantly, called when he could, referenced her in conversation with a frequency that the other characters occasionally found amusing. There was gentle ribbing about it, the grown man who still talked about his mother the way a child talks about their mother, and the show framed this again as part of his innocence, his youth, his small-town Iowa sweetness. But think about what was actually happening in those letters. Radar was the man of his household, had been since his father died, and he had been taken away from the household that needed him by a military apparatus that didn't care about the hole his absence left, and sent to a place that was asking him to do things and see things and absorb things that nobody in Ottumwa could possibly have prepared him for or would possibly understand if he tried to explain. And that gap between what he was experiencing in Korea and what his mother could possibly imagine from a farmhouse in Iowa meant that the one relationship that had always been his truest source of comfort was now, by necessity, partially a performance. He couldn't tell her what the OR smelled like. He couldn't describe what it did to a person to hear helicopters at 3 in the morning for the 100th consecutive time. So he wrote her the version she could hold without breaking, the version that said he was fine, that the people were kind, that he was being careful. And he carried the rest of it alone, in the space, between the letter he sent and the one he could never bring himself to write. The letters weren't immaturity, they were a lifeline to the only person in the world who knew the pre-career version of him. The only person who had known Walter before the army made him Radar. The only person to whom he was not a role, or a function, or a useful presence. Just a son, just her son, just the boy she had raised on that farm who was somewhere terrible and far away and who she was waiting for to come home. Those letters were Radar's way of keeping that version of himself alive, of insisting against all the evidence of where he was and what he was seeing that there was a person underneath the corporal, a real person with a real home and a real history and a real life waiting on the other side of this. The letters were proof that the war hadn't taken everything, not yet. Now I want to talk about what happened when Radar went home, because his departure from the 4077th is one of the most emotionally complex exits in the series, and it contains a truth about his entire character that the show delivers almost accidentally. Radar gets a hardship discharge. His uncle is ill, his mother needs him, the farm needs him, he's going home, and the camp sends him off with genuine warmth. A party, hugs, tears, all the trappings of a community saying goodbye to someone it genuinely loved. And Radar accepts all of it, graciously, warmly in the Radar way. But watch his face during those goodbyes, past the smile, past the gratitude and the affection and the genuine sadness of leaving people he cared about. Watch the expression that's underneath all of that, visible in brief flashes when the social performance relaxes for a second. It's relief. And I don't mean that as a criticism, I mean it as the most human thing in the world, because Radar had been giving everything he had to this place and these people for years, had been pouring himself into the role of the camp's capable innocent, absorbing their needs and managing their chaos and keeping their world running since the day he arrived. And the weight of that, the accumulated, unacknowledged, never properly credited weight of it, had been sitting on him in a way that nobody around him had ever fully registered. He was going home, to his mother, to the farm, to the small, specific life that was actually his rather than the army's. And somewhere underneath the sadness of leaving, there was something that felt like being allowed to put something down. A weight he had been carrying so long that he had stopped noticing it as weight and just accepted it as the permanent condition of his existence. He drove away in that Jeep, and I genuinely think, his shoulders were lighter than they had been in years. And here is the tragic reality of Radar O'Reilly, finally said plainly. He was one of the most genuinely good people in the entire show. Not performed goodness, not strategic goodness, not goodness deployed for social advantage. The real kind. The quiet, unglamorous, daily kind that shows up not in grand gestures, but in the thousand small acts of care and attentiveness that keep a community alive, and that almost nobody thinks to name as heroism because they happen too regularly and too modestly to register as anything other than just how things are. He gave the 4077th everything. His youth, his energy, his extraordinary perceptiveness, his emotional labor, his willingness to absorb the camp's chaos and convert it through sheer invisible competence into something manageable, his patience, his steadiness, his capacity for devotion that never once in all the years he was there seemed to run dry no matter how many times it was drawn from. He gave all of it, and the camp gave him back affection, real affection. I want to be clear about that. The people at the 4077th genuinely loved Radar. The warmth was real, but love and being truly known are not the same thing, and Radar O'Reilly, for all the love that surrounded him, was never truly known by the place he served so completely. The person underneath the teddy bear and the grape nahi, and the uncanny perceptiveness and the perfect administrative competence, the complicated, privately lonely, quietly exhausted, genuinely extraordinary young man from Ottumwa, that person spent years in plain sight and was almost never seen. He was the camp's most essential person, and its most invisible one. And the saddest part is that he never seemed to expect anything different. That's what Ottumwa had taught him, that's what his father's absence and his mother's quiet strength and the farm that needed tending regardless of how anyone felt about it had built into him before he was old enough to question the architecture. You give, you show up, you make yourself useful, and you don't ask for more than you're given, and you carry what needs carrying without making it about yourself. And you go to bed at night in a small space in a war zone with a teddy bear on the shelf and a shortwave radio crackling in the background and the distant sound of helicopters that only you can hear yet. And you get up in the morning and you do it again. That was Radar O'Reilly. All of him. The whole tragic, beautiful, quietly devastating reality of him. We just spent 11 seasons calling it cute. Drop your video ideas in the comments. The best ones always come from you. See you in the next one.